transforming spiritual awakening that got me in a lot of trouble and almost killed me and just destroyed my entire family. So I'll just create a little context for the subject matter today. And it really, this is how I came across my work and really connected with myself and found my voice. So I was really deeply in suffering. And without going into the story, but I did write a book about my personal process. But I was so in trauma that I was in my early 20s. I graduated college and I just went inwards to try to witness, and assume the position of the witness to my own mind. And to make a long story short, that was the only thing I found that alleviated my suffering, even in the slightest bit. And then after a couple of years of doing that every day, probably about 4 hours a day, really intensely, because I couldn't live my life. I went from a normal, happy, healthy person to then there was this trauma with really a psychopathic father that just completely stopped me in my tracks. And that's what precipitated me going inward. So then after a couple years of doing, meditation, I had this complete awakening in that I got hit by a bolt of lightning, just sitting in meditation in my brain. It just ignited. And then I began to, within hours, began to realize, oh my God, this is a collectively shared dream. And we're all dream characters in each other's dreams. And I was realizing, oh my God, I'm beginning to see what the nature of our situation is and who I am and who we all are. But I was, 24 years old at that point, and I was so enthusiastic and excited at what I was realizing that within the day I got myself thrown in the first of probably about 4 or 5 hospitals, into the psych ward. And what saved me, without going into the story, is that it couldn't have been made more clear to me that I was having a spiritual awakening. But the thing which was odd was that at that point, my entire world was reflecting back to me that I was mentally ill. And the DSM-3 had just come out the year before, which had announced the discovery of the chemical imbalance. So every single doctor, was diagnosing me as having this chemical imbalance. And I'm sure you all know, but the same authors of the DSM-3, a number of years, after its publication, came out and said, oh, by the way, there's no such thing as a chemical imbalance. That's a totally made up, this bogus term inspired by the pharmaceutical companies so that they could sell more drugs and make more money. But meanwhile, in my universe in 1981, everybody was reflecting back that I was mentally ill, chemically imbalanced. They were guaranteeing that I would have this illness for the rest of my life and that I needed to be on a number of psychiatric drugs, or the moment I would go off the drugs, I would immediately have another psychotic break. Now, to just meta-communicate, I took myself off the drugs as soon as I could. And I haven't had any of, sort of episode is what they would call it, I think, any episodes for, 38 years or something without any drugs. I had just figured out how to navigate the consensus reality in a way that wasn't freaking people out. Because going back to when I had that awakening, it was like just from one day to the next, from people witnessing me, I had a radical personality change, and all they knew to do was to pathologize me. So basically, I was in a situation where everybody I knew, my parents, my relatives, my friends, the psychiatrist, everyone was reflecting back to me that I was mentally ill. And as they were diagnosing me, I was diagnosing them as just having no idea what they were talking about. But, the more they medicated me and the more I was pathologized, because you're in such an open state, the more ill I got. And the more ill I got, the awakening was just getting like shut down. And then the unhealed abuse was coming up. And I couldn't believe that the psychiatrists were protecting the abuser, which was my father. The more I was actually just describing what was happening, the more they were in alignment with my father, the abuser, and I became the identified patient. And how come I say that is that I began to recognize that the same deeper archetypal pattern that was informing the darkness that played out through my father was now, it had changed channels and was coming through psychiatry. And that was key when I began to realize, wow, there's like a deeper, almost like an iteration of a fractal. And you begin to realize, wow, there's a deeper fractal that's informing all the different sort of these expressions of it. And that's when I began to realize, wow, it's like there's some sort of deeper force, like a darker force that, so I'm actually just assuming it's okay. I just go on to, not just introduce myself, but go on to say a little something about today's topic. Is that okay? Yeah. So that's when I began to realize, wow, there's like this sort of darker force that whenever, I saw it in my life that as I was connecting with my light and trying to shed light on the darkness, for example, in my family system, that there seemed to be a darker force that would always protect the abuser. That was like, trying to stop the light from just shedding light on the darkness. And that became really interesting to me. And I see now, yeah, that's when I was beginning to snap out of just like a personalistic perspective, where the causality is sort of linear and it's all, based on your own personal problems, and recognizing, wait a second, there's like a higher dimensional, just a higher sort of this folding through what was happening in the world, and those darker forces that were seemingly protecting the abuser or trying to, shut down the light, that was in some way connected with my own mind, with all of our mind, not just my mind, with consciousness. And so as soon as I freed myself from the whole psychiatric community, which thankfully was very quick, even though it was totally traumatic, because then I had not just the trauma from an abusive father, but then I had on top of that the trauma from having gone through this unbelievable, the abuse from psychiatry. It was like they were casting a spell. And like I said, the more I became sick from their spell, the more that confirmed to them their viewpoint that, oh, I really am objectively sick. So then the more they saw me that way, and the more they saw me that way, the sicker I became when I was under their control. And I see, so what my experience was I was realizing, wow, at first I was really kind of hard on myself and feeling, wow, I'd really, screwed up and I wound up in these psychiatric hospitals. It's all my fault. And then I began to realize over the years, well, wait a second, that was part of the awakening. It was almost like that was a descent into the darkness of the hell realm. Because I could not believe, not only could I not believe, I never would have believed in a million years the level of unconsciousness, ignorance, abuse, and insanity that pervades the psychiatric system. And keep in mind, we're talking in the early 80s. So in some ways it's gotten better now, but in other ways it's gotten worse because they treat it more biochemically. So I quickly got off the medication, got out of the psychiatric system, and was fortunate to be able to continue my awakening. But I was so in trauma, around, like I said, from my father and then from psychiatry, that it took me, that was, the first hospitalization was 81, the last one was 82. Then it was probably 94 I began teaching. So it took me all that time going to therapy and making art and connecting with, dreams and studying Jung and doing Buddhist practice and studying shamanism and studying alchemy, anything I could find that would address the suffering I was in, because I was in over-the-top trauma and suffering. And then in 94 is when I had the realization, oh, okay, well, I'm not, I'm still a work in progress, and the same is true right now, but I have something that like a gift that I've gotten by going through that ordeal, having the recognition what I went through was just this actual, like a deeper sort of initiation, a shamanic initiatory experience. And that I had understood something in my own self that I could offer and was potentially could help other people. So that's when I opened up my practice and began, teaching and writing and giving lectures. And I've been really fortunate because since then I haven't had to work. I haven't had to have any other job. So I just sort of do this full time. But one of the major books I wrote was about that darker force that is non-local, that pervades the field. And its origin is I was realizing, is in ourselves. It's not separate from ourselves. And the Native American people call it the WETIKO, sort of like parasite, or like, it's like a virus of the mind. And so when the coronavirus came, onto the scene, the one article I wrote was that, oh my God, the coronavirus is like a lower level reflection of the WETIKO virus of the mind. And I'll be saying more about that. But if I could just try to really give a sense of how profound this Native American idea of WETIKO is. So it's a psychospiritual disease of the soul, and it operates through the projective tendencies of the mind in such a way that it operates through the part of us that has, like, a blind spot, so that we then unwittingly become an instrument to act out WETIKO in our life, into the world, in such a way that it hides itself from being seen. And I was realizing, oh my God, every spiritual tradition has been talking and pointing at and symbolizing what the Native American people call WETIKO in their own way, in their own creative way. And but when I began to see this, it just, everything fell into place, as far as, oh, now all of a sudden, instead of just being confused or disempowered, it helped me to really be able to understand what I was dealing with in a way that was helping me. Okay. And now the thing about WETIKO, if I can just try to get across how unbelievably amazing it is, it's a disease. It's a psychospiritual disease of the soul whose origin is the human psyche. And yet it has this, in a way, psychedelic power. So it's an inner disease of the mind that somehow is able to extend itself out into the world and configure events synchronistically in the outer world, so as to express the state of a psyche that's under its thrall. Okay, so what that means is that what's playing out in somebody's outer world, in their life, both individually and collectively, is somehow a reflection of what's going on inside of our psyche. Okay, so what I just described, that's a description of a dream. Because think about a dream. A dream, you go to sleep at night, you have a dream. And what is the dream? But just an expression of the dreamer, of the psyche of the dreamer. And if you're in like a night dream and you don't recognize that, you then react and become conditioned by the forms of the dream. And that's exactly how WETIKO then operates through us, because so it actually configures events in the outer world so as to express the inner state of the psyche. And if we don't recognize that we're seeing our own reflections, like in a dream, we then react to our reflections and become sort of conditioned by them. And in a sense, when you unfold that process, you basically hypnotize yourself by the creative genius of our own mind. And that's a way of describing WETIKO. And if I could just give an example, just to really make that more clear. So say if you're in this night dream, and once again, what is a night dream but your own mind? And if you're holding a point of view in that night dream, the dream has no choice but to just reflect back and offer you all the evidence confirming your perspective, because the dream is nothing other than your own mind. Okay. And so then as soon as that happens, and that happens instantaneously, it doesn't, it's not like this lag time. The moment you hold a viewpoint in a night dream, the dream will reflect back the viewpoint. And then if we're not awake to the nature of the dream, to the nature of the situation that we're in, we then become fixed in the viewpoint that, oh, what I'm saying is objectively true because I have all the evidence. Here's the dream. It's offering me all the evidence confirming my point of view. So then we become fixed in that viewpoint of assuming what I'm seeing is actually objective. So then we get even more entrenched in our viewpoint, and the more entrenched in our viewpoint we get in that night dream, the more the dream will just reflect back our viewpoint, offering us all the evidence, confirming the objective nature of our viewpoint ad infinitum. And what I'm actually describing, we've cast a spell on ourselves. We've actually, through the creative genius of our own mind, we've hypnotized ourselves. And in a sense, that's WETIKO. That's what WETIKO does. And to the extent that any of us are not awake to that process in our lives, we have then, we've fallen asleep and we've fallen under the spell and we're under the thrall of, you can say it a million ways, we're just, we're under the thrall of WETIKO or whatever. And what my whole work is trying to point out, and keep in mind, the origin of my work was the incredible abuse and trauma from my father in psychiatry. So encoded in that seeming really, the traumatic aspect of it was encoded this gift. And that I've been fortunate enough to be able to discover that. And wait, somebody just wrote something. Okay, but anyways, yeah, and so that's what I'm trying to bring forth in the world, because encoded in WETIKO, you see, WETIKO, it's a quantum phenomena. And what I mean by that is just, because I wrote a book about quantum physics, because I realized quantum physics, the revelations emerging from quantum physics, they totally describe the experiences I began having. Because when I had that awakening, stuff was happening to me that wasn't just synchronistic stuff. It was stuff that was completely physically, totally impossible, was happening on a regular basis to me. So anything that I've been taught about the nature of this reality, and I've been trained to think, oh, this is possible and this is impossible, all of a sudden in 1981, when I had my awakening, that fell away and stuff began happening to me that could only happen in a dream. And I understand now that, as I contemplate that, yes, something was being shown to me. And it's taken me close to 40 years and I'm still integrating what was being shown to me. And so one way of describing what I was beginning to understand during the awakening was that, like I was saying, we're having a mass shared dream. And when enough of us have that realization, we can connect with each other. And, I call it, we can conspire to co-inspire each other, which is this real conspiracy theory. We can actually dream ourselves awake. And that's evolutionary and that's radical, because when there are enough people who are coming together and, who have this realization, we can put what I call our sacred power of dreaming together in a way where we can literally change the world. And that's not just new age woo-woo theory. That's actually what's being offered to us. And that's evolutionary, that we're actually being invited to participate in our own evolution. And that's what I basically was seeing that got me so excited in 1981. But now I've developed an articulation that instead of, when I share this stuff, getting me thrown in mental hospitals, I actually have people who are interested, to try to see what I'm pointing at. Because when I say WETIKO is a quantum phenomena, just like by what I mean is that in a quantum world, and this world is quantum on every scale through and through, because even though quantum physics is the study of the microstructure, the building blocks, it also really, like I was saying, even in the macro scale, this is a quantum world. And so how we observe the world, this is what quantum physics really discovered, that if we thought that this world existed objectively, separate from us, that that world that was the classical physics point of view, trying to understand that, that didn't exist. There's no such thing as an objective world. And on the contrary, quantum physics discovered the act of observing the world influences the world observed, just like a dream, which is to say the act of observation is creative. See, and that's major, that every moment we wield this incredible creative power that's creating our experience of ourselves and of the world. And, you know, and that's the medicine for WETIKO, because WETIKO, when I say it's a quantum phenomena in code, it's the source of the greatest evil, not just personal evil, but archetypal evil that we're enacting on ourselves, in the world, collectively. I mean, we're destroying ourselves. We're enacting collective sort of the suicide, and yet encoded in the WETIKO virus, encoded in the evil is this revelation, is its own medicine. And that's what I began to see when I began to transmute the horrors of what I had to go through with my father. Because keep in mind, then my parents died, completely convinced that I was mentally ill. They had bought into the psychiatric point of view because in their world, psychiatrists were authorities. And then all the rest of my relatives disowned me. I haven't had a family for close to 20 years. And, you know, I'm fortunate I have a big soul family, a lot of friends. So, you know, it's all good. But I've had to deal with the tragedy of having my family, you know, sort of consumed by this mind virus. And, you know, so, but how I've gotten to understand it.
Today we're going to be watching my interview with George Sarlo. And during the course of deciding who to interview for the documentary Stand Guard,
Wait, I can't hear it. You're going in and out.
Oh, sorry.
Wait, was somebody was saying something and then it went off?
Just carry on.
Okay, should I just carry on?
Just carry on.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm happy. I mean, stop me at any point because I don't have the best vision. So the text on the bottom, I'm like realizing I can't really see what people are saying. So if anybody wants to moderate, but you know, I'll carry on for a little bit, and then my understanding is I'll open it up for questions. Okay. And so the thing is that my sense is that so many of us are going through something, maybe all of us, something really similar that I went through, particularly people who are awakening and then got into the clutches of psychiatry and get diagnosed and all that, where when I was saying that quantum physics is the medicine for WETIKO, what I mean is that in revealing that the act of observation is creative, quantum physics is pointing at that we have this incredible creative power and that we all have intrinsic, and we're using it 24/7, but if we're using it unconsciously, it's being channeled in a way that's destroying us. And particularly when that's collectivized and, you know, there's, you know, however many, you know, 7.5 of you know, billion people who are unconsciously, you know, acting out their unconscious creative power. But the point is, encoded in the evil of WETIKO, or in the evil of WETIKO, is this enormous creativity that we have. And now with the COVID, with coronavirus, what I'm pointing at in that is that that's a lower level emanation of the higher dimensional WETIKO virus. A way to understand that: don't just think of the coronavirus, COVID-19, as being a physical virus. It's just merely physical. That's only one aspect of its multidimensional facets. It also has this mental aspect. It affects us in our minds. Think about how it's cultivating fear throughout the planet. Then it affects our behavior. Think about how, you know, all the governments are changing policies, and, you know, all of a sudden, oh, people are afraid of each other. We're not going out. We're wearing masks. It's completely informed and affected our behavior. And how our behavior is affected is mediated through the psyche. And the psyche is the arena through which WETIKO operates. Okay, so what I'm pointing out is that the coronavirus has this subtle body. You could say it's like an energetic body that's physical. It makes people sick. It kills some people. It's in the mental realm. It creates fear. It affects our behavior, and all of those are not separate. And when you begin to see that, you begin to realize, oh, wow, there's something that's actually being revealed to us through the actual manifestation of the coronavirus. And now, one way of describing this, the WETIKO virus of the mind, Jung was super switched onto it, but he didn't know the WETIKO word. He called it a number of different things, but the major thing he called it was totalitarian psychosis. Okay? Now, if you remember, WETIKO is an inner disease of the soul that explicates itself through the medium of the outside world. So when WETIKO gets into us, and we all have it in potential, everyone has it. If we think, oh, that person has it and we don't, that point of view that's creating polarization and separation, that's an expression you're under the thrall of the bug. Because WETIKO feeds off of fear and polarization and separation. And the corollary of that is when you see through the separation, through the separate self, you see that's the illusion, and you recognize we're all dream characters, we're interconnected, we're interdependent. That's the point of view that dispels WETIKO's power over us, you know? And because WETIKO doesn't even exist, there's nothing to be afraid of about it. It has no intrinsic independent existence, and yet it can destroy our species. You see, that's the paradox. And what that means is, you see, it can't steal our soul. It tricks us into giving our soul away. Okay, but getting back to the totalitarian psychosis, when WETIKO, so we all have in potential, and it operates through our unconscious blind spots, through our reactions. And once it takes up inhabitants inside of our mind, it colonizes our mind in such a way that it more and more just, we become the host, and it takes over our psyche. And then we see through its lens. And it's like this tapeworm, that you have a tapeworm and it secretes chemicals that you like crave food that feeds it. And you're thinking you're feeding yourself, but it grows bigger until it kills you. But it doesn't want to kill you too soon, or then it would suffer the inconvenience of finding a new host. So one way of really, you see, the thing about WETIKO, it operates through the blind spot. So the way to heal it is to see it, to actually recognize it, to see how it operates in the world through the non-local field and how it operates in our own mind. And here's an example of how it operates. So it actually impersonates us. It actually puts us on. So putting us on has a double meaning of like putting us on like a suit of clothes. It clothes itself in us, in identification with us, but putting us on also means to fool us. So then if we're not awake, we then identify with this limited, false, fictitious version of ourselves. And because we identify with that, then unwittingly we've offered ourselves to be a channel for it to act itself out through us. And all the while we have no idea. We're thinking we're just being ourselves. And but getting back to that totalitarian psychosis, it then assumes the executive function of the psyche. And once it colonizes our minds, and then some people become literally possessed by WETIKO in the sense that they're like literally the incarnation of it. And, you know, I don't want to solidify anyone, but the point is that inner process of WETIKO, of the totalitarian psychosis, is actually playing out in the outer world through the trending towards totalitarianism in the world. You see, that's the way to see WETIKO, when you recognize that the inner situation of our psyche is actually being reflected through the medium of the outside world. That's to see the dreamlike nature. So there are three ways of seeing through WETIKO. One is to see the non-local field. Like I was describing, there was a non-local field that was informing, in my experience, psychiatry and my father and the abuse. And I was realizing, oh my God, they were all like, all of those manifestations of the 3D, this world were contained in expressions of the non-local field. Two is to see the dreamlike nature. And three is actually and you see that the energetic expression of that is compassion. And that's the medicine for WETIKO. And, but the point is that in the same way that what was playing out in my life through psychiatry and through the abuse with my father was this like revelation, what's playing out in our world right now with COVID-19, it's a revelation. It's a living revelation. And it's actually revealing something to us about who we are, about the WETIKO virus in us. That if we're able to translate our experience of what's playing out in our world and actually begin to see the very thing inside of us that doesn't want us to see it, because when we see WETIKO, we take away its power. It has no power over us, and we empower ourselves. So that's my whole life's work is devoted in trying to turn people on because if you think about it, one of the ways that when people are afflicted with the WETIKO bug, what happens? A whole number of things. They actually act out. They accuse other people of doing the very thing that they're doing. Okay, I think we all can have that recognition. And then we act out stuff that is like opposite to our best interest, or will support policies politically that are like will actually be harming us. And all of that is an outer reflection of the inner bug. You see, I keep on pointing at the correlation between the outer and the inner, because that's to recognize the dreamlike nature. That's to wake up in the dream. And it's particularly profound when you connect with other people who are also awakening in the dream. Because when you do that, like I was saying, then you activate the collective sort of genius that's greater than the sum of its parts. And you realize, wow, just like in a lucid dream, when you come together with other people who are lucid and you contemplate what you're discovering, that the universe you're in is of the nature of a dream, you discover, oh, we can dream it different. And that's evolutionary, and that's what's being offered to us. And that's what this is all about. So how about, I can go on forever, but I'm just gonna open it up for questions, or I'm just curious how people are hearing this. Does it speak to anybody, or?
Well, I suppose what you're saying, Paul, is that it takes a virus to fight a virus. That what we're waking up is that as a species, we are the virus in terms of the on an ecological level. I suppose I always said years back, after reading your book, I said the only way that human beings will wake up is when it's on everyone's doorstep. We're living in a global village now. Everyone's around the world, all connecting via this Zoom technology. And for so long now, the carrot that our species has been chasing is the economy. It's a capitalist, it's money. And that obviously is having an impact. We're devouring the planet.
Can I just say something about what you're saying, Craig, is so right on. It's an example with the coronavirus, with the global pandemic, encoded in the seeming horror of it is an actual blessing. And like two examples would be, it's become so obvious to us that we are a global village, that we are interdependent, we depend on each other for our survival. And so we can really, even more than before, help us to see through the illusion of the separate self. And so many people are saying, oh my God, I can't believe what's happening since the pandemic. It's like surreal. Exactly. It's even easier to recognize the dreamlike nature, So that's that same idea that encoded in the darkness, which if we don't have the recognition of what it's showing us, it's going to kill us, that it's actually helping us. that's what I mean about it being a quantum phenomena. There's a superposition of states. It's both like the deepest evil and the greatest medicine and this blessing, and how it manifests, how whatever the pandemic or whatever we're talking about manifests depends on how we going, it's how we dream it. That's really the point, that we have the power. We actually, by our nature.
I mean, this is what people are wanting, what I'm hearing from people. I wanted to go back to what it was before COVID-19 kicked in. It's almost like, oh, I miss, going shopping, and I miss doing, I mean, that's, they're sort of missing this, the realm that was before COVID-19. And, I'm just thinking, I'm actually worried about how, no, we can't go back, because that was abnormal. That wasn't normal.
Yeah. I point out that in one of my recent articles. I say going back, first off, there's no going back, but before going back, we were collectively having like what WETIKO is, it's a collective psychosis. We were like completely in a collective psychosis in which we were destroying ourselves. So who would want to go back to that?
And now we're presented, it's like we've got this opportunity, we've been presented with a blank canvas now, where you mentioned the latter part of your book, Dispelling WETIKO, is that this is where we need the dreamers, this is where we need the writers, we need the artists to paint that new canvas, to paint that new, the benefit of our species. And I think, like I said, my focus is on more on an ecological rather than economical stance. I'm actually, because I used to work at Schumacher College, and that was a nature-based science, ecological, was at the heart of what they're teaching. I'm hoping that they're recovering, because they went through a bit of funding was cut from them. But I'm hoping that they're now starting to get more of a presence. I'm doing my best from my end in Plymouth to try and give more coverage about what the Schumacher College has to offer in terms of ecological thinking, holistic science, and I suppose it's trying to find a rational, logical, scientific approach to give shape to this invisible realm that we all exist in, I suppose.
Can I ask though, I don't know, I've never been on Zoom, so if I talk, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hi, thank you, Paul. I joined a bit late because I was putting a kid to bed, so I'm sorry if you've already covered this, but I see that we all see the collective psychosis, and we see the psychopathic institutions and leadership that we've got. My question to you is, dreaming, writing, art, ecology, academia, it takes a lot of time. And I don't personally believe, I completely agree with everything you write and say, by the way, but what I'm really interested in is this missing piece of how you actually change the leadership, which is the only way the institutions and the policies, I believe, are going to change. I don't think it's going to come from writing and commenting and thinking alone. And I think that compassion and the understanding ultimately of independence, I completely agree, is the ultimate view. But I don't think that cuts it with psychopaths and sociopaths.
Yeah. No, totally.
And so what, do you have some idea, like, obviously things like testing sociopathy before someone's able to, go for leadership, or being able to remove them if they are not up to it when they're in that. These are things, but how do you get from where we are to that?
Yeah. No, and that's like such a great question, because it's all like fine and dandy to be just like pontificating about spiritual, creative stuff, but yet here we are in like a crisis where we're destroying the biosphere, the life support system of the planet. What do you do? And the one thing that comes up in my mind is that it starts with the individual. Like any one of us, our role is to do our work, whatever that looks like. And then, to find we're all being called. Like for me, it was really clear once I was going through my experience that I was describing, I was being called. And the question was I going to have enough courage to assent and say, okay, I will follow that. And, so when any one person, and I'm not naive thinking, like sort of new agey going, oh, I'm just gonna like send out light and love and compassion and it's gonna change the world. No, because I point out in my work that there are two channels there, for example, spiritual practitioners who are just doing prayers and mantras. That's great. But a lot of people I know who are doing that are sort of self-absorbed because they're not engaging with the outside world, because the outside world is the medium through which you actually participate in your inner process.
Absolutely.
So, and then a lot of political activists have the best of intention, wanting to take down, the evil forces, but they're coming from anger and hatred. And so they're unwittingly feeding that energy into the collective, field. And I point out that there has to be a cross-pollination of the two. It's what I called a spiritually informed political activist, where you have to be politically involved in whatever way that is, whether it's just as a good wife or husband, or, it could be just in your close circle of friends, or it could be like I'm more out on the stage and a writer and a speaker. We all have these different things to play out, our vocation. But, if we're doing that with authenticity and integrity and an open heart, I just feel really strongly, because I don't know what else to say, because it feels so overwhelming, the evil and you see, here's the thing, it's so easy to get pessimistic. And a lot of people I know are filled with despair and pessimism because, oh my God, what are we ever going to do? How can we take down these psychopathic, leaders? But I point out that to have a pessimistic attitude, then by the power of our minds, we'll actually draw evidence confirming
Absolutely.
our pessimism in a self-reinforcing feedback loop whose origin is within ourselves. So the idea is to see the darkness, to see whether it's in the leaders or in the system or whatever, to see how it operates out there, not to concretize it as being separate from us, because that's reflecting that part of us, to see how it operates inside of our mind. And then when we see the darkness, you see, because the evil, why it can play out so much is people turning this blind eye.
Yeah.
So many people just, oh, I don't want to put my attention on evil, I'm afraid it would feed it. Well, that might be true up to a point, but what actually feeds evil way more is being an ostrich and putting our head in the sand and not looking at it. Then that empowers the evil. But if you see it and you recognize, this is to see WETIKO, and you recognize how it plays out in the world, how it plays out in ourselves, and then to recognize, wait, I'm a sovereign being. I get to choose where I place my attention. I can actually invest my attention on creating the world I want to live in. That's the way. You see, when there are enough people of us who do that, then, just look at a dream. When there are enough people in a dream who do that, then we're not going to dream up psychopathic leaders, So that I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but that's what comes through.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose in a way we've had in a way it's the way I look at it. It's like these psychopathic leaders have also been instrumental in our waking up. Almost like characters that play. If it weren't for their part.
No, but that's absolutely true. That people who are really triggering us or seemingly getting in our way are actually, they're our best allies, because they're really like teaching us how to really embody compassion. That if we didn't have them, like the thing about WETIKO, if WETIKO didn't exist in the world, we would have to invent it. That's how important it is. It's the greatest catalyst for the evolution of our species that we could ever imagine,
Paul,
Yeah.
can you say more about why we need the idea of WETIKO? I mean, can we not just say that we have an infinite potential to co-create the world we want, reality we want, through our interconnectedness and so on? Why do we need to postulate a mental virus?
Sure, totally. No, that's a great question. And what comes to mind, just go back to this being a dream, right? Mm-hmm. What is a dream? A dream is a manifestation of our unconscious. Okay. So if I have something that's in the shadows, that's in my unconscious, guaranteed it's going to get dreamed up and it's going to manifest in the dream. you know, and then it's going to be a recurring dream that, like, you know, and because it's unconscious, it's going to, you know, manifest in a destructive way. And but it's all reflecting that part of me that I'm unconscious to. But if I don't have that recognition, then I'm going to have a recurring dream where it's going to, that darkness is going to get more and more and more amplified. So you see, what I'm pointing out is that this mind virus, or the evil forces, you know, that are playing out through the system or through individual, you know, these leaders, that's actually, when you recognize, oh, that's not actually separate from us. All of us have an unconscious shadow, and something in the way, just from the power, when you really understand, when you have a dream, how does dreaming work? You see, when we're unconscious of something, invariably, there's no getting around it. What happens when you're unconscious of something? You're identified with it. You can't see it. You're identical with it. It's the lens through which you see everything. So we then actually project it out. We actually dream it up as the process through which we're beginning to become conscious of this unconscious darker part that we're blind to in ourselves. And then typically we react to it thinking it's separate. But then the key point is when you recognize that what you're reacting to out there is actually a reflection of what's in you. So it's actually, there's no other way of becoming conscious than like having our unconscious parts play out in front of our eyes. But the key thing is, do we recognize that we're looking in this mirror, you know? And interesting, etymologically, mirror means the holder of the shadow. And in the apocryphal text, Christ says, I am a mirror to those that know me. Of course, that got written out of the Bible, you know? And so another way of answering your question, think about, here's the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree, about to wake up, right? About to become enlightened. What happens? All the forces of evil come and mess with him and try to obstruct him and seduce him and distract him. And but the point is that those darker forces were actually his secret allies, that he wouldn't have been able to catapult himself over his edge into realization without those darker forces. If he didn't recognize they were allies, they would have stopped him. They would have obscured him. And then there wouldn't have been a particular Shakyamuni Buddha, you know? And so it's that same idea that encoded in the darker forces, they're actually helping us to more open our heart, connect with compassion, get in touch with the darkness in ourselves, and get in touch with our true power, and get in touch with our ability to set boundaries, on and on. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, I still struggle to see why we need to postulate a virus. I mean, I would see those as psychological processes or spiritual processes. Perhaps there are higher levels of consciousness that are becoming conscious through us, you know, a collective mind or a field of consciousness that is
right, but that's true.
But I don't see the need for the virus.
Yeah, but the virus sees the need for us. That's the thing, you know. And one way of understanding it, when there's trauma, you know, think about it. What is the symptomology, the pathology of trauma? It's the compulsion to repeat. It's the repetition compulsion, right? So the way we try to deal with our trauma actually creates the very trauma we're trying to heal from in an infinitely self-perpetuating feedback loop whose origin is our own mind. That is the pathology of trauma. But yet, encoded in that pathology, encoded in that repetition compulsion, is the solution, that we're trying to experience something, right? Like my favorite is like this definition of trauma that I love is it's unexperienced experience. Like when the historical moment of trauma happens, it's so overwhelming we can't integrate it. So, but the point is, once that trauma is getting closer to being integrated, to becoming conscious, what happens? The repetition compulsion gets worse. It gets more amplified. So on one hand, it seems like, oh my God, things are getting worse and I'm getting crazier and sicker. And the danger is that's when people can kill themselves, which is tragic, because from the deeper point of view, that's an expression that something unconscious is actually entering the realm of consciousness, you know?
Thank you.
Yeah, who has, because I saw there were some more questions. Who has some other questions?
This might be a bit from left field, but you know, for the last 10 or 20 years, billions of people have been obsessed with lower your carbon footprint in 1,000 different ways. And COVID comes along and says, enough already, human beings, lower your carbon footprint, take the planes out of the sky, stay at home, don't, you know, no car traffic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, I do think it's nature, you know, just speaking back to human beings and just telling them, you know, get a grip before you lose it all. So that's just another angle of everything that you're saying.
Yeah, well, that one way of understanding that is like when you see this as a dream.
Yeah.
A dream is continually reflecting back, and it's, you know, having this communication with us through symbols. Symbols are the language of dreams. And this waking dream is an oracle that's continually speaking to us, but it's speaking to us symbolically, you know. And that's why, you know, the idea of cultivating the awareness, the symbolic awareness, seeing the dream like nature and having the recognition that, oh wow, this universe is like, you know, a continually unfolding oracle. And just like a dream at night, if we don't get the message, it's going to amplify its messages. And so something like that, you know, what you were just describing with the carbon footprint, it makes me think, yeah, you know, we should pay attention. Something is being actually, you know, shown to us, you know.
Yeah, and then if we don't do it ourselves, a higher force will just step in and remind us that, you know, how small we are. And how
Well, and that higher force is our own actual nature. Because, you know, think about a dream. A dream is compensatory. What's that?
Well, we are nature, and as well.
But I'm saying, but who we are, our true nature is so much more broader than we can ever imagine. What I mean is, just like a dream is a compensation. When we get one-sided in our life, a dream comes to like compensate the one-sidedness so as to get us back in balance. Okay. And so the same thing when we get, because of like, you know, the materialism and, you know, industrial, you know, civilization, we're so disconnected from nature, from ourselves, that our true nature, you know, who we actually are, what you can call it, God or a higher mind or whatever, yeah, it's going to compensate. It's going to give us the message, hey, you've gotten off balance, you've gotten one-sided, you know.
So I suppose we need to be nurturing our nature. Would that be a kind of
yeah, totally.
I mean, it's
So any other questions?
May I?
Yeah.
I am wondering if you could comment, or if anyone would like to comment, about the role of embodiment in the midst of the landscape that you're describing. Embodiment practice, many different kinds of embodiment.
Yeah, no, definitely. And for me, that's, you know, I think a lot of us can relate to it who've been in trauma. I know for me, you know, trauma gets in the body, you know, and that's where the pain is. And so it's so easy to go up into the head and all that. But my understanding is that we are like the instruments for the incarnation of the divine. And the idea of incarnation means an embodied incarnation, but that's where the pain is. So, you know, my practice is, and I'm still a work in progress, is like, you know, more and more to enter fully my body and to be present with my pain and not just dissociate into dreams or the mind. That's what comes up for me, just real simply.
What do you have a practice like with? Because a lot of what with the trauma and the overwhelmingness of it, the psychosis, the storm, how do you find the center of that storm? What to get back?
Yeah. For me, it's really, so you can probably see in back of me, I'm a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner. So I do just every day a lot of spiritual practice, which in essence is really just like being present, with myself and with what comes up and being really spacious. But even more than that, if I hadn't connected with being creative, with the creative spirit, then I would have been in deep trouble. I can't say enough about the profound importance of expressing ourselves creatively, because there's so much inside of us. It's exactly what Christ in the apocryphal text was saying when he was saying, if you bring forth what's within you will save you. But if you don't bring forth what's within you, it will destroy you. And I know that's really true for me. And I've been fortunate in that, I found a particular way, teaching and working with people and writing, because I was trained as a visual artist. And I feel like even with the writing, I'm just making collages. I'm just totally doing art. And the idea being is that, that's our nature, that like to be made in the image of God, so to speak, is that we're creators. And, the sense I have is that the greatest poison in the human psyche is unexpressed creativity. That really creates illness. And so to the extent that any of us, and it doesn't make a difference what the medium is, the way we just, walk in the park can be creative. The way we wash a dish can be creative. So we don't have to like paint or draw or anything, but, because so many of us have taken on the version, not only of how other people see us, that's not true. We've taken on the image of how we imagine other people see us. And why I say it that way is because the origin of that process is our own psyche. And so we've outsourced our own ability to see, and then we've given it away, and then we like step into this imagined image, and that's WETIKO. Remember I was saying WETIKO impersonates us, okay? And so to the extent that any of us could really just be in touch with who we are, whatever that it would look like, I have no idea, and to creatively express that, and to create a community, of friends or a spiritual community where we support each other in that, because that's the idea in Tibetan Buddhism. They talk about the three jewels: Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, teacher, teaching, and the community. And many people feel the Sangha, the community, is the most important of the jewels, that who you hang out with is really important. When you hang out with other people who are being creative, who are being open-hearted, who are seeing you, dreaming you up in a good way, not just projecting their shadow and dreaming you down, and who are just, being creative, it creates a contagious energy in the field that supports all of us to awaken, because it's not a competitive sport who's more awake, but when you actually discover who you are, you discover, well, I'm not separate from you. We're actually interconnected. And so it's really important, I think, to create that sense of spiritual community, even if it's 2 or 3 people or hundreds or thousands all over the world, doesn't make a difference, but just where you feel seen. Because I've learned that half of the healing is when you actually see someone. That's what happened to me. When I got out of that last hospital, everyone was seeing me as mentally ill. And not for 1 second did I buy into it, but it was really a challenge. And then I met my teachers, these Tibetan lamas, and I became very close with them. I mean, I've known them now for close to 40 years, and they're like family. They come and visit me and stay with me. And they were, instead of solidifying me as being ill, they were actually seeing me as they were seeing the healthy part of me, seeing the part of me that was awakening. And they can only do that because they were in touch with the part of them that's awakening. And by them seeing me that way, it was literally like they were creating a bridge for me to step into that whole healed, awake part of myself. And what I've learned is that that's what we all can do for each other. You don't have to be a lama to do that.
Paul, may I ask a question about, you were talking about creativity and then into community, and I wonder if you have insights on words that people in difficult situations, there being a lot of people out there in the world who believe that someone's tools for creativity should be taken away from them in crisis. And so there are a lot of vulnerable people who can recover very effectively if they have their creative tools, but if their families or if their communities believe that creative tools are a privilege, or they don't understand the healing relationship between creativity and the body. Those people find themselves without words to say, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. Have you ever?
That, to me, that's this criminal thing to take away somebody, particularly somebody who's in a healing crisis, to take away their means of creatively expressing themselves. I would say that the person who's doing that is unwittingly in the role of the abuser. And, I can't say enough about, like, in indigenous cultures, when somebody begins to spiritually awaken, what happens? Typically they seem crazy and they're having all this weird behavior, but the indigenous people would recognize, oh, they might be being called to become some sort of shaman or healer. And so they take care of them, they support them, they make sure they're not going to do damage to themselves or to others. And they give them everything they need. And that's all I needed was just time to integrate what I was realizing. But right away, I just got locked up and pathologized and medicated and diagnosed. But I know that if people really had the recognition of what was happening and just, created a container where I could just creatively express what I was realizing, I mean, it could have saved me, just decades of unbelievable torture and suffering. But I see also the perfection, because that was part of my process. So yeah, I can't say enough about the profound importance of creative expression, particularly for people who are snapping out of the consensus reality spell and are connecting with a deeper part of them. I mean, that's their oxygen that they need to breathe, is creative expression. It's just unspeakably important, because it helps them to integrate. It helps them to integrate what they're realizing. That's what makes art art. It's not just like, oh, I'm expressing something that I already know. No, the act of actually creatively expressing something is deepening the realization of what it is I'm trying to express. And if you take that away from someone, you're basically killing them.
I agree. I have felt a lot that we keep having scenarios where someone is told that they are not allowed to have their creative tools and be a part of community. They can only be a part of their community if they reject their own healing. And many people don't have any way to verbalize that. And so reaching those people to extend community to them can be so challenging. And I really want to thank you for everything that you do to extend community to people who aren't reached, and to people who might find your language for talking about your experiences and all of this. And I am certainly one of those people. So a lot of
thank you.
For me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Because like if you guys were out in Portland, I have like the trippiest community that's formed around me. I mean, I've been having these groups for, over 25 years. And it's all like amazingly creative people, artists, shamans, healers, therapists, ex-mental patients, whatever. And we're also awakening, and we're realizing, we're like helping each other to deepen our awakening. And the thing I think which makes it really cool for people is I'm not in the role of like, oh, I'm the teacher or the healer, and I know better than anybody else. No, no, no. I share my struggles. I'll get triggered, and then I can't facilitate because I'm in my unconscious, so other people facilitate. So we all share all the roles. It's a real circle. And people just so appreciate that, because then that cuts through that tendency to abuse power. Because when there's hierarchy, if somebody's above somebody else, that opens up the door for abuse of power.
Could I just jump in as well?
Yeah, yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for how well you've been doing tonight, just speaking. I find it very calming, your voice.
Oh, thank you.
I was told by a friend about this session. I didn't quite know what I was getting into, but it felt like something that I needed to get into. And I came here sort of expecting to hear something new, or maybe new words for something I've known in other words before. And to my surprise, I didn't hear anything new or new words. And I'm realizing that that's not disappointing, actually, that it's beautiful. How powerful just confirmation is.
Yeah.
And on the subject of creative tools being taken away, and the subject of community, and the subject of what someone else was asking about earlier, kind of psychopathic leaders and things like that, I felt like stringing some sense together, if I may, which is when we see the ones taking the creative tools away, again, it's very easy to be compassionate to someone who's already nice or done something good, but like true compassion is meant for that which we would normally judge as being like not lovable, and that's where it actually shines and comes into real play. So through a compassionate look, we could see that the ones that take away the creative tools are just acting out their wounding of those creative tools having been whisked away from themselves.
Thank you so much for saying that.
I recognize that. Bless. I recognize this so much in the like Greta Thunberg phenomena as well, in how I could see so many people who are speaking against her were people who were in her shoes when they were kids, like I was, and their voices, our voices, were not heard, were taken away, and then seeing someone young being able to voice those things was kind of hurtful instead of liberating at first, because why does she get to and I didn't get to? So what if the same kind of thing is happening here with the creative tools? And it's again not done maliciously, but just a furthering of the wound.
Well, what you're saying, it's so right on what everything you just said, because this is one thing it brings up. In the WETIKO book that I wrote, I talk about that when somebody who's really afflicted with WETIKO sufficiently, and they see somebody else in their light, in the light of their soul, they unconsciously try to kill that light because it reminds them of what they've killed in themselves, and that's just another way of saying exactly that. And when you're saying that, I'm just having such a deep sense of like the compassion that you're coming from, and having the forgiveness, and that's such a beautiful thing. And that doesn't mean that, maybe you like let them do that, but it also maybe you actually set a boundary and say, no, I'm not going to let you do that. And that's you having fierce compassion.
Thank you. I can't say I've been recognizing it as such. But ever since I was really young, it felt wrong to subject anyone else outside of me to the tyranny of my emotions before I get a handle of them in some way.
And I just want to say what you just made me one other memory real quick, and that is there's something that happens which is so trippy. I watch myself do this. I watch so many people do this, to the extent that I have an unhealed part of me that's in trauma that I can't experience because it's so painful. I will then unconsciously enact the role of the abuser towards somebody else and dream them up to experience being Paul and experiencing the parts of me that I'm not able to feel. And so many of us are doing that, but when you actually have a container, that's what my groups are, to explore, how we're dreaming up each other, and we can add consciousness to that in a way that can really help to liberate it.
And what if this is also anchoring, again, the compassion, because by you putting yourself in the shoes of the abuser role, you realize that
Right.
the abuser was themselves not coming from a very good place.
That's so beautiful. I mean, I just get a sense you're so coming from such a deep place of compassion. Wow. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, and just to tie it up, when I said about the leaders as well,
Yeah.
it's an idea that keeps coming and going and coming and going, and now it's on the tip of my tongue again, about how I feel like, that question wasn't answered, but only because the answer was weighted on in a box where the answer cannot exist. So therefore the answer was not satisfying. So I just wanted to open up that box of policy and politics and leaders, and just kind of invite anyone who has concerns on that kind of subject to reflect a little bit on how do we define a leader, because so far I think we've kind of reached quite a maniacal point of defining leadership, and it has to be infallible, and it has to be perfect, and they have to be kind of surrounded by a team of moderators of everything, so that they can keep up this image of perfection, and for them to be able to continually be the leader. But what I have seen in participating in a peer support session as opposed to a group therapy session. So peer support means kind of like group therapy, but there's no hierarchy because we're all on equal footing. So we all kind of like dip in and out from supportive roles and receiving roles. And so what I've seen from that is that you cannot hold any role for too long or forever. And
Yes.
you need to keep alternating between them.
Well,
So
that's what
if we begin from redefining this leader role by being not capable of holding that position of leadership, even for 4 years, 4 months, or however we want to divide up time in our subjective manner.
Right, and that's what I was describing when I was describing the community in all the circles. I have 3 or 4 of them every week, where I'm like superficially in the role of the leader, but then I'm not having a monopoly on that. I'm not identified with that. And like I said, when I get in my unconscious and I'm playing out my stuff, then somebody else picks up the role of leader or facilitator. It's exactly what you're saying. And that, I feel, creates a really healthy community. And that actually creates an alchemical container in which all of our unconscious stuff can play out so as to be assimilated. That's beautiful.
Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Can I chime in there that it makes me think of the terms that people are talking about now, about things like eldership, and myself been working with various different people over the years in a sort of circular model of leadership, which I think has been drawn from sort of indigenous ways of doing things, and to be careful not to glorify that, but to take what looks better or seems better and to try and bring it. And certainly on this journey of awakening for myself, coming from a narcissistic family system and seeing extremely unhealthy versions of leadership, and I seem to be being called to learn these more circular ways. And I've written so many notes. I've loved the talk this evening. So much is coming together for me, so many understandings and linkings. And to be honest, the pain of having to see the within, of the internalized version of these hierarchical structures, because if I can't see them in myself, then I can't sit in circle and try and do this circular leadership. And even then, I know I have blind spots. So it was really helpful to hear you say, Paul, that you know, there's a moment where you may relieve yourself of that role with the support of the community. And yet there's something for me about eldership. There's something for me about, I want to see in someone above me an elder that I trust. And I did not have that growing up because of narcissism.
Right.
And I want to try and become something like that. And I feel so far from it because I'm at the beginning of that journey, but it feels that's an important role as well. There's something in that.
Yeah. And I just, well, what you're saying, that's really cool, because it brings up for me one of the most like horrifying parts of my process that I think probably a lot of us can relate to. So there was the external figure of the abuser, whether with my father was really, he was, you know, possessed by that role or monopolizing it. Then there were the psychiatrists. But the horrifying part is once I realized, oh, that role, those voices got internalized. And then they could exit stage left. And then I was my own control system. I was actually enacting my own abuse on myself. And that's the place where I would just feel completely crazy, because I would realize, wow, I'm like, one hand, I'm being the sadist, just like punishing myself, but then I'm also being the masochist, who's like the recipient of the torture. But you know, the thing which is interesting to me is that in that there's like this good news, and the good news is there's nobody else doing that I was doing it to myself, which is, that's the doorway to potentially integrate it. And what you were saying about that any of us could model being a good, you know, sort of leader or facilitator. And one of the ways I try to do that, you know, in my groups, like I'm trying to say again and again, I act out my stuff. I will openly share my struggles, and not just share it verbally, but I'll play it out. I'll like act out, I'll get triggered and all that. But I try to model what I want other people to do, which is then the group will reflect back to me all my unconscious parts. And I try to model it by really reflecting and really looking. Because when you're in a dream, if people you trust are holding up a mirror saying, well, I make my experiences A, B, and C, you'd have to be a fool to not at least consider and try to find in yourself, oh, I wonder what they're seeing in me. Let me, instead of just so many people just go, no, I'm not doing that, or that's not true, to actually do the very thing you're wanting other people to do. I feel that that's really a good way of maybe being in the role of a leader.
Can I say something quickly? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I actually worked as the PA of one of these psychopathic leaders. He was a financier, and I worked for him for 2 months over the winter. And he was so used to having everybody completely kowtow to his emotional manipulation, and I just refused to react to him. And it was quite a painful process for me, because I could visibly see how painful it was for him to realize for the first time that his belief that all of his suffering was coming from everyone else was actually not true, that it actually was coming from him. And he did fire me, obviously, but I do genuinely believe in those 2 months, enough of an impact was made to show that leadership doesn't necessarily have to come from the top of a hierarchical position. And
Right.
even though that particular role was short-lived, everybody who witnessed the change in his behavior as a result of the way I refused to react to him had now hopefully has an understanding of the power of kind of just sort of being compassionate and not playing into other people's games.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I want to, so it's funny because I was thinking, well, maybe that's why you only lasted 2 months, because I know when somebody's in that role of like, being the boss, and part of it is that there's a field where everybody has to collude with them.
Yeah.
And if you're in the role,
they hated me.
If you're in the role of holding up the mirror,
Stonewalled
because
me.
remember, the mirror is the holder of the shadow. If you're in that role, and I imagine you probably like either, said stuff or just weren't subscribing to colluding with him, that, and typically the person in the role of the boss, they can get like sort of violent, energetically violent when somebody is not like enabling them in that way. But the one thing I want to add, sometimes if it's not even safe to say anything, you know, even just somebody assuming the role of witnessing and recognizing, wow, this person is really psychopathic and is coming from fear and needs people to, like, you know, support their psychosis. Just seeing that itself without even saying anything can be helpful.
I really hope so, because it was a tough 2 months.
Oh, wow, I feel for you.
Thank you, but thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a really useful discussion because
Yeah.
yeah, you know, I feel under a lot of pressure to kind of kowtow to the system, and it's just really nice to meet a community of people who see things in the same way and recognize the same challenges that I see.
Right.
So thank you.
Right.
I really relate.
Totally. No, I appreciate that. One thing that just came up that I just think that people would appreciate, when I was in psychiatry, I mean, I can't express enough, you know, how horrifying that was, particularly when you're in like a super open, vulnerable state and all that. And I remember from the psychiatric point of view, it would have been a successful treatment if I would have agreed that I was mentally ill and taken pharmaceutical drugs for the rest of my life. From their point of view, that would have been like, oh, another successful treatment.
Mm.
And I just want to ask, like, what's wrong with that picture? You know, like, I never would have become who I am and found my work and been able to connect with my voice and written my books and help people in any way, you know?
You just had to,
Yeah, go on.
I suppose it was kind of like, it's the same as like a journey that you had to go through, like a psychological hell. And it sounds like, Paul, from your work, somehow you found peace in that, in hell, in that psychological.
Well, I'm still, to say I found peace, I'm still a work in progress. I mean, you know, because if I could just say one thing about that, Craig, and that is, I had written this major article right before the pandemic happened, and it was about the archetype of the shaman. And the shaman, I think a lot of you know, that's the wounded healer. And on my website, in my bio, like, I never think or thought of myself as a healer, but when I came across the idea of the wounded healer, I'm like, oh, I'm a wounded healer, because I'm so in touch with the depth of the wound. And that's actually a great insurance around keeping, you know, around like that I'm not going to inflate or have too much self-importance, because I'm so in touch with, you know, the depth of my wounding. But that's connected to the shaman archetype. And the thing I want to just transmit, because it's so helpful. So I wrote this major article that's become a chapter in my next book on the archetype of the shaman. What does the shaman do? Well, first off, they get called. It's not something you would ever choose to do consciously. You'd have to be out of your mind to do that, because the suffering is so overwhelming. But they get called by the spirits. And then the key thing is, if they assent, if they say, okay, I'm going to cooperate with the calling. And then, but in essence, what the figure of the shaman does, they're very permeable, you know, very empathic. And they will literally, if they're working with a person or a community, they will literally take on the illness. And taking on as a double meaning of, they'll confront it, but they'll take it within themselves, and they will literally fall ill. And, you know, but what makes a shaman an accomplished shaman is that they don't stay stuck in that. They're able to metabolize that illness and find their way back to themselves and to assimilate that darkness of the illness into their light of their nature. And by them doing that in a non-local way, they're actually helping to heal the field. And how come that archetype, that image, speaks to me so deeply is because I feel that's a description of all of us. That, you know, we are like these shamans in training who've gotten sickened by the madness in the world. And if we just stay sick and identified with being wounded or sick or traumatized, then that's kind of tragic. Then we can't be of help to anybody, because we're not even able to help ourselves. But it's a sense of, there's a way, because I still feel incredibly wounded and traumatized, you know, but there's a way. Like 40 years ago, I couldn't imagine experiencing this. I was like, no, I have to figure out a way to heal this. And then over the decades, I realized, well, what if it never goes away? And now I carry my wounding and my trauma in a way where it becomes the portal for my creative gifts, you know? And so I just feel like that image of that we all are these wounded healers, these shamans, and because it's so easy to personalize and identify with the part of us that feels crazy or sick or ill or out of sorts. But the point is that what if that's in the field? What if that's a collective archetypal process that we, because we're so sensitive and open and empathic, have taken into ourselves, and then that can become the doorway to even connect with an even deeper light that is who we are. You see, that just really inspires me. So I'm just glad that I remembered to share that.
Hello. I came in a little late, but what you're saying is very fascinating to me, because when I was I was an artist, I studied art, and I knew there was something healing in art. So I've been working in it since I was about 22, in using art as helping in as an expressive tool in places that look like the cuckoo's nest. So my job was to bring boxes of creative tools to people. So I can't even imagine what it would be like to be taken. That's my job, was to bring that to people in various places that housed just a lot of distress. I can't imagine why would they take it away from someone. And then also in my own life, after the years passed, and now I understand why, maybe astrologically or why energetically, I started an alternative psychiatry in a pilot project that used music, poetry. It's natural to me. So I was kind of shocked when I even found out some people take that away from someone. I can't imagine. And then I realized when I was taken in by the quicksand of breaking through consensus reality a couple of times in my life, I realized that my own creative expression kept me away from being pulled into it for longer periods of time. It was very short periods, because I couldn't express myself verbally in my home. It was sort of not allowed. It was, thank you so much, because you're reminding me that that I was over the years, and still have been able to express constantly through poetry or dance or painting. But you're bringing it all together in that recently I have also understood, well, not just about this shamanic illness, like what the heck am I going through? It was a while back. Just people trying to label me as bipolar. By the way, the earth is bipolar last time I checked, or multipolar. What's so bad about, you look outside and sometimes it's thunder, sometimes it's peaceful. So why, and this whole system, and trying to pathologize it. And I became meeker and meeker and meeker, and I became what I thought was broken, but really, and in relatively, it was very short periods of time where I was in these places, just days, not years or months, and I busted out of that through my, and also one more thing, sorry, is that I had realized that we have a calling, and that we've been actually called to take in the hit, maybe from lifetimes, or maybe just in our DNA, that we've taken that hit, and it was painful, and yet we took the hit because we understood our call. Well, some of us understood the calling, and we can come back. And even in the depths of the worst part of how I felt, despair, the whole business, that there's a little flame there, tiny little flame that I thought at one point I lost. But there's that tiny flame that that you can come back and use that to tell anyone we've been there. So your description of the wounded healer is the whole. Thank you so much, everybody.
Sure. Well, it just feels like it really helps to contextualize when you were just saying, going through a shamanic illness. Yeah. When I was deeply suffering and I had gotten out of the last hospital and I was totally in trauma, and would have been easy to identify with, oh, I'm just really screwed up, but it helped me enormously when I was able to recontextualize and understand that I was like, I gotten enlisted into a shamanic initiatory process and was going through a shamanic crisis. And then one other thing I just remembered, you helped me to remember something, and it was with reference to that question of somebody taking away people's like creative art supplies or their means of expression. I mean, in a sense, that was the core part of when I talk about my father and the abuse, without going into the story. I was in college and I was, really good student, and then I took an art class and I realized, oh my God, I'm an artist. That's what I want to do. And my father took that impulse, the way he interpreted that as, oh, that impulse in my son has to be absolutely, completely eradicated, obliterated, and annihilated. And so he did everything and anything he could to make sure I wouldn't be an artist, because in his mind, oh, I was going to be a poor, struggling artist who was going to have to like depend on my parents for money, which was the last thing, I was wanting. And it absolutely could have destroyed my creative impulse, but what it actually did is it even made it stronger, and I was fortunate. Somehow I had the strength, and I don't know where I got it from, but it's interesting, just that idea of the connection between having one's creative impulse trying to be like shut down, and
it brings to mind Paulo Coelho, that as a very young man, he wanted to write. His father told him he was crazy. And all he wanted was a typewriter. But he was institutionalized for 3 years, I think, in a mental hospital. Because, and everyone, they laughed at him that it was a stupid notion. But he doesn't.
Right.
Anyway, a lot of, yeah. Anyway, blessing to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Paul. Could I ask you a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
With the awakening, more and more people awakening, where do you think it's all going? I mean, do you see it as a sort of evolutionary principle in the species? Because, that raises other questions about why did we end up asleep in the first place? But where do you think this all?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And that's a great just sort of contemplation. And I think of quantum physics, before quantum physics came on the field, physicists thought if they knew enough information, they could figure out that this universe was determinate and they could predict the future. And then quantum physics came along and empirically showed, oh no, it's all probabilistic. And that the best way to predict the future is to create the future. So the point is, all bets are off. We could be in a situation where we as a species are destroying ourselves, and then maybe it will regenerate in billions of years and, come back right to the same point, to the place where we can make a different choice. Or maybe this is the universe where we're right at the edge, because, oftentimes, if not always, the unconscious, and this is important, the unconscious, when I first heard this, I was like, wow, that's true. The unconscious will create an unbelievably difficult, life-threatening situation, particularly for, for an individual in a dream or in their waking dream in their life, so as to bring out the best in them, so as to catalyze them over their edge, which they wouldn't have gone over if they were comfortable, to really wake up. And I'm talking, that's like sort of a known thing in psychology when you study just people's individual dreams. And I'm wondering if collectively something of that nature is happening, that we've the collective unconscious, or, the deeper dreamer of the dream, which is us, our nature, our true nature, that we're dreaming ourselves right to the edge of the abyss, where we're either going to be destroying ourselves, or we're going to catalyze us into a global awakening. And being an artist, I'm creating this art happening called Global Awakening. And you're all invited to participate. There's no membership fee, and it's whatever we dream it to become. But the point is that we're the ones who are responsible. We're the ones who are dreaming it. And so, yeah, it's yet to be seen what's going to happen. But it's definitely seen that one of the most amazing things, and I'm glad I'm remembering this about quantum physics, it's expanding the realm of the possible. And what I mean by that, when I first learned this, it blew me away. Think about a quantum entity. A quantum entity, before it's observed, exists in any and every possible state it could ever exist in. And then along comes an observer and observes that quantum entity, and then one of the potentialities actualizes itself and manifests. And all the others, they just vaporize as if they never existed, or maybe they exist in a parallel universe. But what that means is that even if one of those possibilities, even if one, to quote a quantum physicist, is highly, incredibly, ridiculously unlikely, that could be the possibility that manifests in this next moment. So extend that to our situation. Even the possibility that sufficient number of human beings could wake up and connect with each other and evolve and create peace on earth, quantum physics says, oh, that's within the realm of the possible. And I would add, and if we're not like envisioning that, then what are we thinking?
I was thinking, and I appreciate what you said. I use slightly different language, I think. But when you go through the awakening, you don't necessarily connect with other awakening people, and you tend to go through it. I would go very alone. But the language that I sort of used was, I'm going from a ego operating system transitioning into a being operating system.
Mm-hmm.
Two totally different operating systems.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks everyone, and thanks Paul for being involved and sharing your life experience and what you've learned from it and dedicate your life. And it seems there's a lot of resonance for a lot of people. I really appreciate it today. And the last one I was going to ask is that we've just been recording it. Is that okay with everyone?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that okay? All thumbs up.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine with me. Yeah.
Fine. Yeah. Fine. Yeah.
And was there any final words that anyone wanted to share just as we close, or anything Paul wants to share, like in terms
Thank you.
Or...
Thank you. Thank you,
so
Joe.
much.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody.
So inspiring, so clear, so succinct, beautiful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Yes,
And what
thank you.
record this so we can listen to it, later on, or for posterity. Like, we're benefiting from so many beautiful talks from others that came before us now. This is now joining that great encyclopedia of human understanding. So that's a good idea, and thank you everyone for agreeing to it.
Thank you so much, everyone.
If you want to save the chat, you go into chat at the bottom of the page, and then you'll see those three little dots, and then it'll say save chat. Just click that if you want to save it.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah, I just want to, okay, go ahead.
I just want to say, yeah, thank you very much, Paul. It does feel like I've met Elvis, but sorry to put you off on, I really admire your work, and
Well, thank you.
It completely changed my perception of things. It really, I don't want to sound, but it really gave me a kind of map in which to navigate my own inner journey, and I can certainly relate to your journey. I'm a filmmaker, and I'm wanting to sort of find ways in which I could, like you did with your book, manifest the journey that I took, and to share that with others, to get so that they can. It's about, I suppose, from where I'm talking, is like it's providing a map. We're all navigating our own invisible inner terrain, but I think there are like Paul and all of us. We're all participating in this journey. It's not just one person. It's everyone, and I think we've had this this meeting, I would like to know if there's what the next step forward is. Is there a possibility that we could have sort of regular meetups like this to talk about our experiences and how we're navigating these realms?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, just one thing. Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody was going to say something.
Just it's amazing. Fully support that.
Mm.
Yeah.
I would also like to chime in. That's an awesome idea. Let's do that.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I mean, I feel so appreciative of the invitation to, you know, come and hang out with you guys today, and in any way I could be of help, you know, whatever that would look like, you know, because when I became aware of a number of years ago, I was so wanting to heal, and I realized, well, I'm not going to really fully heal until everyone gets healed, type of thing, you know.
Mm.
And so just in any way I could be of service, and you know, yeah, just let me know. But really, I'm just filled with this gratitude for all of you today for the invitation. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Take
Okay.
care.
Thank you, Paul.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye.